In a dramatic escalation on the Eastern Front, Ukrainian drones launched a precision strike on a Russian military train believed to be carrying ammunition and equipment bound for frontline units. The attack, which took place in the early hours of Tuesday morning, has reportedly caused significant disruptions to Russia's critical supply routes and triggered a series of explosions that lit up the night sky across the Belgorod region. Russian state media initially attempted to downplay the event, claiming the fire was caused by a technical malfunction. However, multiple independent videos shared on social media show powerful detonations ripping through a stationary train, sending flames and debris high into the air. Analysts now confirm that the strike marks one of Ukraine's most successful drone operations targeting Russian logistics since the start of the war. According to Ukrainian military sources, the drones were part of a coordinated long-range attack involving multiple unmanned aerial vehicles launched from different directions to evade Russian air defenses. Each drone was equipped with a specialized warhead designed to penetrate armored targets. The convoy, stationed near the Belgorod rail hub, was reportedly preparing to transport ammunition and fuel to Russian positions near Kharkiv. The moment the drones struck, secondary explosions followed, suggesting the presence of volatile cargo on board. Satellite images released hours later show a stretch of rail infrastructure destroyed, with large scorch marks indicating massive fire damage. Russian emergency crews rushed to contain the inferno, but the extent of the destruction suggests it could take days to fully restore operations. The strike has rattled Russian military planners who have relied heavily on rail networks to move troops and supplies. Military experts note that Russia's dependence on trains makes it especially vulnerable to attacks like these. For Ukraine, this represents a strategic breakthrough as it continues to develop its domestic drone manufacturing program. Kiev's forces have repeatedly targeted infrastructure deep inside Russian territory to disrupt logistics and morale. A Ukrainian defense official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said the operation was part of a larger plan to cut off the arteries that feed the Russian war machine. He emphasized that the drones used were domestically produced, showcasing Ukraine's growing technological independence despite limited Western supplies. Russian authorities quickly moved to control the narrative. The Belgorod regional governor claimed that the fire had been extinguished and that there were no casualties. However, eyewitnesses describe a different scene, with reports of multiple explosions continuing for nearly an hour after the initial impact. Local residents posted videos showing black smoke rising from the horizon and loud booms echoing across nearby towns. Several railway workers are believed to have been injured, though Russian media has not confirmed these details. The Kremlin has yet to issue an official statement, but sources in Moscow say the attack has sparked intense discussions within Russia's defense ministry about the vulnerability of its transport networks. The incident also comes at a time when Ukraine is ramping up cross-border drone attacks in response to intensified Russian missile and artillery strikes on Kharkiv, Smyly, and other border regions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly stated that Russia cannot expect to wage war without consequences inside its own territory. By targeting supply lines and ammunition depots, Ukraine hopes to stretch Russian defenses thin and force Moscow to divert resources away from the front lines. This strategy appears to be working. Russian logistics teams are now facing growing difficulties maintaining consistent supply flows to frontline units, especially in the northern sector where Ukrainian counter-offensives have regained small but significant territories. Military analysts are calling this operation a potential turning point in the conflict's logistics warfare. Drone warfare has evolved from tactical reconnaissance to strategic interdiction. Ukrainian engineers, with support from private defense startups, have developed long-range drones capable of striking targets up to 1,000 kilometers away. These drones are relatively inexpensive compared to missiles and can be mass-produced at a fraction of the cost. Experts say this technological shift gives Ukraine an asymmetric advantage, allowing it to damage Russia's logistics network without deploying manned aircraft. The attack on the Belgorod train is a prime example of how drone innovation has reshaped modern warfare, where precision strikes can cripple enemy infrastructure deep behind the front lines. Following the strike, Russian security forces reportedly launched an extensive search operation in the Belgorod area to locate the launch sites of the drones. Local residents have described increased checkpoints, aerial surveillance, and restricted movement zones. Despite these measures, Ukrainian drones have managed to penetrate Russian airspace repeatedly in recent weeks, striking oil depots, radar stations, and energy infrastructure. This growing pattern of attacks has exposed gaps in Russia's air defense coverage, particularly against low-flying, small radar cross-section drones. Some experts believe that Ukraine may now be deploying swarm tactics, overwhelming Russian radar systems by launching dozens of drones simultaneously from various directions. Inside Ukraine, news of the successful strike was met with celebration across social media. Videos of the explosion circulated widely with patriotic captions praising the country's drone operators. Officials in Kiev hailed the attack as a demonstration of Ukraine's growing capability to hit back effectively. The strike also coincided with announcements of new funding from Western allies to enhance Ukraine's drone manufacturing capacity. British and American defense representatives have already expressed admiration for Ukraine's innovative use of unmanned systems in combat, calling it a model for future warfare. In a recent statement, Zelensky declared that drones are the eyes and wings of Ukrainian freedom, promising to increase production tenfold before the end of the year. For Russia, however, the attack represents another embarrassment in a long line of recent setbacks. The Kremlin has invested heavily in fortifying border regions, deploying electronic warfare systems, and increasing air defense patrols. Yet despite these measures, Ukrainian drones continue to find and exploit weak points. Military commentators on Russian state television have begun to question why these attacks keep succeeding, suggesting that corruption and poor planning within the defense establishment are to blame. Some even speculate that internal sabotage or information leaks may have helped Ukraine identify critical transport hubs. Russian bloggers, who often provide friendly updates, posted angry messages accusing the government of incompetence and downplaying the damage to avoid public outrage. The timing of the strike is particularly notable. It occurred just days after reports surfaced that Russia was preparing to move new heavy artillery systems and fuel supplies to reinforce its troops near Kupiansk. If the destroyed train was indeed part of that movement, the consequences could be significant. Ukrainian officials have claimed that at least 12 rail cars carrying artillery shells and fuel were destroyed, potentially delaying Russian resupply efforts for weeks. The resulting logistical strain could give Ukrainian forces a crucial window of opportunity to advance in the Kharkiv sector. Though neither side has released verifiable figures, independent satellite imagery indicates a vast area of destruction, suggesting a substantial loss of material. In Moscow, the political fallout from the strike is already being felt. Reports suggest that senior railway and defense officials have been summoned for emergency meetings to assess the damage and propose countermeasures. Russia's transport ministry has ordered increased patrols and surveillance of all military rail routes, including the use of electronic countermeasures to detect drones. However, experts doubt these steps will be enough. Ukraine's expanding drone arsenal, coupled with its growing intelligence network, has made it increasingly difficult for Russia to secure its massive logistical backbone. Some analysts even warn that Ukraine could soon begin systematically targeting bridges, rail yards, and fuel depots across western Russia, escalating the conflict's scope beyond the current front lines. Internationally, the attack has reignited debate about Ukraine's right to strike targets inside Russia. Western governments have maintained cautious support, often emphasizing that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. While some European leaders have expressed concern about potential escalation, others argue that such strikes are a legitimate form of self-defense given Russia's ongoing attacks on Ukrainian cities. NATO officials have refrained from commenting directly, but have acknowledged that Ukraine's drone capabilities have grown remarkably sophisticated. Meanwhile, Russia has accused NATO countries of indirectly assisting in the attacks through intelligence sharing and technology transfers, an accusation Western officials firmly deny. The psychological impact of these attacks cannot be underestimated. For months, ordinary Russians living near the border have faced growing anxiety as explosions and fires become increasingly common. What was once a distant war has now come uncomfortably close to home. Residents of Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kursk regions have begun to express frustration online, questioning the government's ability to protect them. Videos showing burning infrastructure and drone fragments scattered across roads have circulated widely despite censorship efforts. This growing unease within Russia's border communities could gradually erode public support for the war, especially as economic hardships mount and casualties continue to rise. Meanwhile, Ukrainian morale has received a powerful boost. For a nation under constant bombardment, each successful strike on Russian soil is seen as a symbol of resilience and revenge. Ukrainian media outlets have framed the Belgorod attack as a message to Moscow that nowhere is truly safe. Soldiers on the front lines have reportedly celebrated the news, viewing it as payback for the relentless shelling of Ukrainian cities. Analysts say this morale factor, while intangible, plays a critical role in sustaining Ukraine's defense effort amid a grinding war of attrition. The economic implications of the strike are also significant. Rail disruptions in Belgorod could affect commercial shipments across western Russia, adding further strain to supply chains already weakened by sanctions and resource shortages. Analysts predict a temporary slowdown in the movement of military goods toward the southern front, particularly around Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. The Russian military may be forced to rely more heavily on truck convoys, which are slower, less efficient, and more vulnerable to further attacks. This logistical bottleneck could complicate Russian operations just as winter approaches, when mobility becomes even more challenging due to harsh weather and terrain conditions. As the situation develops, both sides are preparing for the next phase of this drone-driven conflict. Ukraine's drone factories are reportedly operating around the clock, with new models being tested for range, speed, and payload capacity. Russia, in turn, is accelerating its efforts to build and deploy counter-drone systems, including radar jammers and interceptor drones. However, with the battlefield rapidly evolving, it remains unclear whether traditional defensive systems can keep up with the pace of innovation. The Belgorod train strike may soon be seen as more than just a tactical victory. It could mark the dawn of a new era in modern warfare where unmanned systems redefine the rules of engagement. For now, the world watches closely as Ukraine's drones continue to pierce through Russian defenses, challenging the might of one of the largest militaries on Earth. The explosion in Belgorod is a stark reminder that this war is no longer confined to trenches and front lines. It is being fought in the skies, across supply routes, and through networks of intelligence and technology. The destroyed train stands as a symbol of a shifting balance, where precision, innovation, and persistence may ultimately outweigh sheer numbers and firepower. And as both nations brace for what comes next, one thing is clear: that battlefield has changed forever.